Lisa Carter, 38, lived a seemingly stable life in Denver, Colorado. Married to Jeff for 15 years, mother of 2 children, Emily, aged 10, and Lucas, aged 7, she dedicated herself to her work as a sales manager at a technology company. Lisa's routine was exhausting, divided between taking care of the house, meeting the demands of work, and ensuring that her children were happy and well looked after. However, within her, there was a growing dissatisfaction that no one seemed to notice. "Can you pick up the kids from school today?" Lisa asked one morning as she packed her children's backpacks. "I'll leave work later." Jeff, her husband, sitting at the breakfast table, just nodded, without looking up from the newspaper. "Sure, no problem." The automatic tone of his response bothered Lisa. Lately, every conversation with Jeff had been like that, short and superficial. Even with the discomfort she felt in her marriage, Lisa was extremely dedicated to her children. When she was with them, she did her best to participate in their activities and be the present mother she always dreamed of being. However, in the moments of silence, she felt exhausted. Am I doing enough? Am I being the mother they need? These questions echoed in his mind frequently. His relationship with his mother, Susan, didn't make it any easier. Susan had always been a critical and demanding woman, and Lisa grew up trying to meet her expectations. "You need to organize yourself better, Lisa. You can't let work consume your life," her mother said in a recent conversation. Although Lisa knew her mother meant well, these criticisms made her question her own capabilities. "I'm doing my best, Mom," she replied, trying to remain calm. Susan's criticisms reminded her of her childhood, when she was always told, "You can do better." These words followed her into adulthood, creating constant pressure to be perfect in all areas of life. The result was a tired Lisa, trying to balance her mother's expectations, her own demands, and family life. His only source of comfort was Karen, his best friend since college. Karen always knew when Lisa was overwhelmed, even if she didn't say a word. "You need a break, Lisa. It can't go on like this forever," Karen said during a phone conversation. "I know," Lisa replied, sighing. "But I feel like if I stop, everything will fall apart." The truth was that Lisa was on edge, and something was about to change. The weeks passed and Lisa's stress increased. Work demanded more and more of her, and the demands at home did not decrease. Some nights, when everyone was asleep, she would sit in the dark room, with a glass of wine in her hand, staring into space. "I can't go on like this," she muttered to herself. The physical and emotional exhaustion seemed to consume every bit of energy she had. Lisa began to lose connection with Jeff, who was also caught up in his own routine. During dinner, she tried to start a meaningful conversation. "Do you ever feel like we're just surviving? Like we're doing everything on autopilot?" she asked, hoping that Jeff would realize what she was feeling. "Of course, sometimes. But that's how life is, isn't it?" he replied, without looking up from his plate. Lisa sighed, frustrated. It wasn't the answer she wanted. She longed for more, for something that would make her feel alive again. Furthermore, Lisa carried a deep fear, an anxiety that never completely left her. Since the tragic death of her brother Tom in a car accident when she was 18, Lisa has lived in constant fear of losing someone she loved. This silent trauma made her controlling, always trying to make sure everything was in place, that nothing went wrong. "I can't lose control. Not again," she repeated to herself in moments of panic. "Have you been thinking about Tom a lot lately?" Karen asked during one of their conversations. "Always," Lisa replied in a low voice. "It seems like the more I try to move on, the more he appears in my thoughts. Especially when I think about the kids. What if something happens to them?" Karen tried to comfort her. "Lisa, you can't live with this fear all the time. You have to let it go." But Lisa didn't know how. This fear was a part of her, something that prevented her from relaxing and enjoying life fully. One afternoon, after a long, difficult day at work, Lisa stopped in her car before heading home. Looking at the house, she began to cry silently. She felt exhausted, as if she were carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. "Why can't I be happy?" he whispered. His mind was filled with unanswered questions, and the emptiness he felt seemed to grow every day. The thought that her life was backwards began to haunt her. "Am I focusing on the wrong things?" he asked himself. In her loneliest moments, Lisa imagined what her life would be like if she had made different decisions, if she had paid more attention to herself, her desires, and her needs. But at that moment, she was trapped in a life that seemed to be slowly falling apart. On a rainy Monday morning, Lisa left home late for an important meeting at work. She had a strange feeling, a restlessness she couldn't explain. "Did you get your umbrella?" Jeff asked as she hurried out the door. "I got it, thank you," she replied, without stopping. But deep down, that question seemed to resonate differently, like an omen that something was about to happen. As she drove through the wet streets, Lisa tried to focus on the meeting, but her thoughts wandered. Doubts about his life, his dissatisfaction and tiredness took over his mind. "I can't go on like this," I thought, as I accelerated slightly. Deep down, she knew she was close to a breakdown, but she ignored the signs. Suddenly, a truck suddenly entered the next lane. Lisa tried to brake, but the slippery floor and reaction time weren't enough. The car skidded and, in an instant, collided violently with the guardrail. It all happened very quickly, but the impact was devastating. She felt the world spin, and then, silence. As the car stopped running, Lisa lay motionless on the seat. There was a ringing in his ears, and everything seemed distant. "Is this real?" she thought, as her vision began to darken. It was as if time had stopped. Suddenly, a strange peace enveloped her, and the pain she expected to feel just wasn't there. It was as if her body was floating, but she couldn't move. She tried to speak, but no sound came out. Jeff. Emily. Lucas, her family's names popped into her mind, but she couldn't say anything. Fear gripped her for a moment, but it was soon replaced by a deep calm. Lisa began to see everything from a different perspective, as if she was moving away from herself, observing the accident scene from the outside, floating above the destroyed car. "What's happening to me?" she asked, confused. In the distance, a light began to shine, and Lisa was drawn to it. The warmth of the light enveloped her, and for a moment, she forgot everything, the accident, the pain, the worries. Everything seemed to be fine, but at the same time, something was wrong. "Did I die?" he asked, but there was no answer. As Lisa approached the warm, welcoming light, a sense of peace came over her. The physical pain from the accident had completely disappeared, and all she felt was an indescribable lightness. This can't be the end, she thought, but at the same time, something inside her said that maybe it was. She continued floating towards the light, as if it were inevitable. In the distance, he heard a soft voice calling his name, but it wasn't familiar. "Lisa," the voice echoed, like a whisper that pulled her closer. Suddenly, scenes from his life began to flash before his eyes. Happy and sad moments, great achievements and regrets, all at once. She saw the birth of Emily and Lucas, remembered the happiness she felt when holding them for the first time. "I can't leave them," he thought, feeling a pang of fear. Her children's smile appeared in her mind, but at the same time, a voice echoed again, "You always put others first, Lisa." "And you?" Lisa was confused. She always thought that being a good mother and wife meant sacrificing her own needs. He remembered the times he had ignored his own desires, the little things he loved, like reading a good book or going for a run in the park. Everything was put aside so he could take care of others. But that was right, wasn't it? She asked, as if waiting for someone to answer her. The light around her began to change, and suddenly, she was in a completely different place. It was his home, but it seemed strangely upside down. The colors were brighter, the furniture was upside down, and everything seemed out of place. "This isn't my home," Lisa whispered, feeling a sense of unease. And then she heard the same soft voice as before, but this time clearer. "We're all upside down, Lisa. Everything you believe to be right is wrong." She began to walk through that distorted version of her life. She looked at her reflection in a mirror, but it wasn't what she expected. In the reflection, she looked different, younger, but also sadder. She remembered how she felt before having children, the dreams she had that she never pursued. "Was I always like this?" she asked herself, as she watched the younger version of herself with tears in her eyes. "I wanted to be free. I wanted to be happy." And then, in a flash, he realized that he had lost himself over the years. The inverted house scenes began to transform again. Now, she was in the car, moments before the accident. Everything was in slow motion. She looked at herself driving, her expression tired, her eyes focused on the road ahead. The same soft voice spoke again, as if inside his mind. "Don't you see? You've spent your whole life looking the wrong way. Your life is backwards. You forgot yourself." Lisa tried to argue, but the truth of those words was undeniable. Suddenly, the scenes changed again. Now, Lisa was in her childhood home, surrounded by old memories. Sitting on the sofa, she saw her younger self, around 10 years old, playing alone on the floor. His mother, Susan, sat in a nearby chair, with the same critical expression she always had. "You need to try harder, Lisa. You can't be so lazy," Susan said, as she leafed through a magazine. Young Lisa just nodded silently, trying to please but clearly hurt. "I did what I could, Mom," murmured adult Lisa, watching the scene from the past. "I tried to be perfect." But as he said this, he realized that this effort had consumed his life. The soft voice returned. "You spent your life trying to be what other people wanted. You never allowed yourself to be who you really are." Lisa felt a pang in her chest when she heard those words. It was true. She was always the obedient daughter, the devoted wife, the tireless mother, but what about her own dreams? Lisa began to remember all the times she left her own desires aside. Dreams of traveling, writing a book, running a marathon. All of these desires were put on the back burner as she met the expectations of others. "I just wanted to be enough for everyone," he murmured, as tears began to roll down his face. But was that enough for me? Her mother's figure disappeared, and now Lisa was in her children's room. Emily and Lucas were sitting on the bed, playing with their toys. She watched them from afar, with a mixture of love and regret. "They need me, I know that," he thought, but soon he felt a deep doubt. But what if they need a mother who is happy with herself too? The voice inside her quickly responded, "A happy mother teaches her children to be happy. An unhappy mother just repeats the cycle." Lisa looked at her children once again, and her heart sank. She knew she loved those children deeply, but over the years, she had lost love for herself. "I never wanted this for myself," he whispered, as his vision began to blur again. The environment around Lisa began to distort, as if it was disintegrating. The mysterious voice that accompanied her became softer. "It's time for you to understand what needs to change." Then everything went out again. Lisa felt like she was being pulled back into the light, but this time, there was an urgency. "I don't want to go back," she thought, as her body seemed to move away from the reality she was in. But at the same time, he knew it wasn't his time yet. She had more to live, more to discover. "I want to change. I need to change." And with that thought, Lisa was enveloped by light one last time. Lisa opened her eyes and found herself in a place that didn't seem to belong to this world. It was a completely white room, with no beginning or end, and in the center was a figure. This time, the figure was clear, and Lisa recognized herself reflected in the presence before her. It was like looking into a mirror, but this version of her seemed different, serene, confident, but also full of repressed sadness. "Who are you?" Lisa asked, her voice shaking. The figure smiled softly. "I am you, Lisa. The part of you that you've denied for so long. The part that wanted to be heard, that wanted to be free." Lisa felt a chill when she heard that. She always felt like there was something missing, but she had never been able to put it into words. "Did I do everything wrong?" Lisa asked, afraid of the answer. "It's not that you did it wrong," the figure replied, "but you spent your entire life believing that you needed to live up to what others expected. And in doing so, you forgot who you really are." Lisa felt herself sinking. That was it. She was living upside down, always prioritizing others but never herself. "So what do I do now?" Lisa asked, desperate for answers. The figure smiled again. "You have a chance to change. To live your life differently than you have until now. To put your own dreams, your own needs, first. You still have time, Lisa. It's your decision." Lisa felt a surge of hope mixed with fear. It was terrifying to think about changing her life, but at the same time, something inside her lit up. "Can I really do this?" she asked, almost in disbelief. The figure approached her and, touching her on the shoulder, replied, "Yes, Lisa. But first, you need to go back." And with those words, the white room disappeared. Lisa felt like she was being pulled back into her body, but this time, with a new sense of purpose. Lisa opened her eyes suddenly. The white light was gone, replaced by the distant sound of sirens and the metallic smell of blood. I was back at the scene of the accident. She felt pain, but it wasn't the physical pain that affected her most. It was the memory of everything she had experienced. The feeling that her entire life was upside down suffocated her. "Am I alive?" she asked herself, blinking to get used to reality. Beside him, he saw paramedics working frantically. "Take a deep breath, you're back," one of them said, but Lisa could barely process the words. As she was placed on the stretcher and taken to the ambulance, fragments of her near-death experience came and went, like flashes from a vivid dream. "I saw my life, backwards," he murmured, trying to understand what he had just experienced. "Lisa, are you okay?" A familiar voice caught her attention. It was Jeff, pale-faced, running alongside the stretcher. He held her hand tightly, his eyes filled with fear. "You were so close to leaving us," he said, almost crying. Jeff's words hit her strangely. Before, this statement would have comforted her, but now she felt something different. "I was close to leaving myself a long time ago," she thought, without speaking out loud. A new reality was forming in his mind. Everything she had experienced, the reflected figure, the inverted house, the distorted memories, it all seemed too real to ignore. And as the ambulance drove away from the scene of the accident, Lisa realized that her life would never be the same. At the hospital, after hours of examination and observation, Lisa was told that her injuries were not serious. She was lucky. As he recovered in his room, Jeff and the children stayed by his side. Lucas, just 7 years old, looked at her with wide-eyed concern. "Mommy, are you going to be okay?" he asked. Lisa smiled and held her small hand. "Yes, honey, I'll be fine." But inside, she knew that good now meant something completely different than she imagined before. Jeff, visibly relieved, approached the bed. "You scared me, Lisa. I thought I was going to lose you." She felt the sincerity in his voice, but something was different between them now. She looked at Jeff and saw a good, dedicated man, but one who had also become emotionally distant over the years. And then the voice of his experience came back. You lived the way you thought was right, but it was all the other way around. When Jeff left to get coffee, Lisa was left alone with her thoughts. The memories of NDE came back with a vengeance. What marked her most was the feeling that her life, in fact, was in reverse. She always thought that doing her best for others made her a good mother, a good wife. But now, it felt like she was neglecting herself all the time. I don't want to keep living like this, he thought. He felt an urgency to change, to regain control of his own life. But how to do this without destroying everything around you? Lisa spent weeks recovering physically, but the internal transformation was much more complex. Every conversation, every interaction, felt different now. One night when she was back home, she decided to talk to Jeff. They sat in the living room. The children were already asleep. Jeff, we need to talk, Lisa began, looking straight into his eyes, something she hadn't done in years. Jeff frowned, confused. About what? About us, about how we've been living, Lisa replied, feeling the weight of each word. I spent so much time trying to keep everything going, trying to be the perfect wife and mother, but I lost myself in the process. I don't know who I am anymore. Her voice started to shake, but she knew she needed to say it. Jeff looked surprised. What do you mean by that? You've always been so dedicated. Everything's fine between us, isn't it? Lisa shook her head, tears beginning to form in her eyes. No, Jeff. It's not. It hasn't been for a long time. She talked about the accident, about the near-death experience. He talked about how he saw his life from a different perspective, and how he realized he was living in an inverted way. I can't go on like this. I need to change. Jeff was silent for a long time, processing everything she had said. He looked at the ground, clearly shaken. I didn't know you felt that way, he said, his voice breaking. But what does this mean for us? Do you want to break up? The fear in his voice was palpable. Lisa hesitated. This wasn't what she wanted, but she also knew that things couldn't continue as they were. I don't know what that means yet, Lisa admitted. But I know I need to start living differently. I need to think about myself more. And I need you to understand that. Jeff looked her in the eyes and slowly shook his head. I understand. If that's what you need, I'll try to change too. For the first time in a long time, they had a real, vulnerable conversation. There were no guarantees about the future, but something had begun to change between them. Over the next few days, Lisa began making small decisions to reconnect with herself. He went back to running in the park, something he always loved, but had put aside for years. He started reading again, allowing himself a few minutes of peace before going to sleep. And, little by little, she began to rediscover who she was, besides being a mother and a wife. I knew the road would be long, but I was willing to move forward. As the months passed, Lisa reflected more and more on her near-death experience. She began reading about other people who had been through similar situations and discovered that many of them also experienced profound transformations. It's like we have a chance to see our lives from a new perspective, he commented to Karen one Saturday afternoon as they walked in the park. And what did you see? Asked Karen, curious. Lisa paused for a moment, taking a deep breath. I saw that I was living the wrong way. Always putting others ahead, but forgetting about myself. Karen looked at her empathetically. That must have been hard to realize. Lisa nodded. It was. And it still is. But now I know that I need to make myself a priority too. It's not selfishness, it's survival. Karen smiled, proud of her friend. I always knew you were strong, Lisa. But now, you're more aware of who you really are. Karen's words made Lisa feel lighter. That was it, she was finally discovering herself, after so many years of hiding behind the role she played. At home, changes began to be noticed. Jeff also started to be more emotionally present, trying to keep up with Lisa's growth. "I'm trying to understand everything you've been through," he said one night as they lay down. "And I think for the first time in years, we're actually talking about what matters." Lisa smiled. "Yes. And that's how it should be." The children also noticed the difference. Emily, ever observant, once asked, "Mommy, why do you look happier now?" Lisa was surprised by her daughter's perception. "Because I'm taking better care of myself, honey. And it makes me a better mom to you and Lucas." Emily smiled and hugged her. "I like seeing you like this." Lisa's life was no longer upside down. Now, she understood that the key to balance was not forgetting herself. She was still a devoted mother, she still loved Jeff, but now, she also loved who she was. And that made all the difference. Lisa would never forget her near-death experience. It was like a milestone, a watershed in his life. Before the accident, she lived as if everything around her was more important than her own happiness. Later, she learned that to truly take care of her family, she needed to take care of herself first. The relationship with Jeff continued to transform. Although there were still challenges, they were more united than ever. "You know, I got lost along the way too," Jeff confessed one night as they drank wine together on the porch. "I was so focused on work and responsibilities that I forgot who I was." Lisa held his hand, feeling a renewed connection. "Now we can be reunited together," she replied. The changes were also reflected in his work. Lisa was no longer willing to sacrifice her well-being for impossible deadlines or unnecessary stress. She set clear boundaries and, surprisingly, it didn't make her any less effective. On the contrary, she felt more productive and centered, knowing she was in control of her own life. From that point on, Lisa began to live with more presence. She stopped worrying so much about what others expected of her and started asking herself what she really wanted for herself. "I was living backwards," she often told Karen. "Now it all makes sense." The trauma of the accident never left her, but she turned it into an opportunity for growth. Sometimes life turns us upside down so we can see things the right way, Lisa reflected one afternoon as she watched the children playing in the backyard. The simplicity of the scene brought her a peace she hadn't experienced in years. Lisa had been reborn from her experience. And, with this new perspective, she realized that it is never too late to change the course of life. The near-death experience was not an end, but a new beginning. A fresh start to live fully, with your head held high and with your heart at peace. As the months went by, Lisa was feeling more balanced and in control of her life. He was practicing what he had learned from his near-death experience, putting his own needs first. However, one morning as he was getting ready for work, he received an unexpected call from his boss, Thomas. "Lisa, we need to talk as soon as you get to the office," he said formally. The dry tone worried him, and she felt a slight anxiety creep up her spine. Upon arriving at the office, Lisa went straight to Thomas's office. He was waiting for her with a serious expression. "We are restructuring the company. Unfortunately, some changes will be necessary, and this may affect your position," he said bluntly. Lisa was frozen for a moment. Work had always been a central part of his identity. Even with her new priorities, losing her job was a hard blow. "Are you firing me?" Lisa asked, her voice low and controlled. "Not exactly," Thomas replied, without looking her in the eye. "There is a proposed demotion for you. We don't want to lose you, but the new structure requires adjustments. I know this may be difficult to accept." Lisa felt a whirlwind of emotions, anger, frustration, even fear. But suddenly, the memory of his near-death experience came flooding back. She reminded herself that she needed to look at this situation differently. Taking a deep breath, Lisa looked directly at Thomas. "I appreciate the offer, but I can't accept less than I deserve. I spent years here giving my all. I'm not willing to sacrifice anymore. If you don't value me as a manager, I'd rather leave." Thomas was surprised. "I didn't expect this response from Lisa, who previously always accepted more responsibilities without question." The strength and firmness in his voice was evident. The silence that followed Lisa's statement was piercing. Thomas, who had always prided himself on being tough in negotiations, had no immediate answer. "I'll need to discuss this with the council," he finally said, somewhat shaken by Lisa's unexpected attitude. She nodded calmly and left the room, feeling the weight of the decision she had just made. For the first time in years, Lisa put her worth above the demands of her job. As she walked out of the office, Lisa felt a mixture of fear and freedom. She had faced a situation that, months ago, would have left her panicked, but now, she felt in control. If her career took a new direction, she was ready for it. Her near-death experience had shown her the value of life, and she was no longer willing to live up to other people's expectations. "I can create my own trajectory," he thought, with a shy smile on his face. Days after the meeting at work, Lisa found herself on the verge of a transformative decision. The company's board offered her a new proposal, a leadership role in another sector, with more responsibility and a significantly higher salary. "It's a great opportunity, Lisa. We think you might be the right person to lead this new area," Thomas said, visibly nervous about offering something different after Lisa's firm refusal of the demotion. For a moment, Lisa was tempted to accept. It was the kind of opportunity that, in the past, would have been any professional's dream. "This could change my life," he thought briefly. But then, a voice inside her whispered, "Remember who you are now." She thought about Jeff, about the children, about the changes she had made in the last few months to reconnect with herself. Accepting that offer could mean going back to the exhausting cycle that almost destroyed her. "I can't accept it," Lisa said, calmly but firmly. Thomas was in shock. "I don't understand, Lisa. It's a huge leap in your career. Are you sure?" Lisa looked at him, feeling a clarity she had never felt before. "Yes, I'm sure. I realize that what I want is no longer a title or a bigger salary. What I want is a balanced life. I need time for my family and, most importantly, for myself." This decision was a real turning point in Lisa's life. By refusing the offer, she was taking a decisive step towards finally freeing herself from the expectations others placed on her. When she left Thomas's room, she didn't feel defeated, but rather victorious. He knew this choice was best for his peace of mind. "I don't need to prove anything to anyone but myself," she thought as she drove home. When Jeff arrived home that night, he immediately noticed that something had changed. "How was the conversation with Thomas?" he asked, waiting for news about the proposal. Lisa sat next to him on the couch, holding his hand with a calm smile. "I refused," she said, her voice full of conviction. Jeff looked at her, surprised but not disappointed. "And how do you feel about that?" "Finally free," Lisa replied, looking out the window at the horizon. Lisa's decision wasn't just about work. It symbolized a new beginning for his entire life. He decided he would open his own business, something he always wanted to do, but never had the courage. With the support of Jeff and her children, she began planning a small personal development consultancy, helping other people who, like her, had lost themselves in the demands of life. And with each new step, Lisa continued to remind herself, "Now, I'm living life upside down."